Hello, my dear listeners, and welcome back to Whispers of Crime. I'm Hannah, your guide through some of the darkest, most haunting, true crime stories you'll ever hear. Tonight, I want you to settle in. Maybe you're driving home. Maybe you're curled up on the couch with a blanket. But wherever you are, I want you to prepare for a case that has stayed with me since the moment I learned about it. Rebecca Bernadette Purcell was born on November 19, 1981, in the city of Quincy, Illinois. She was welcomed into the world by her loving parents, Bernadette and William, and grew up alongside her sister, Sarah. Quincy is a small Midwestern city tucked along the Illinois-Missouri border. For Becky, it wasn't just her birthplace, it was her lifelong home. She grew up there, studied there, built a career there, and ultimately, it was where she raised her family. As a child, Becky attended Payson Seymour Elementary School. Later, she went on to Quincy Notre Dame High School, where she didn't just graduate, she graduated valedictorian. Her drive and determination carried her to Quincy University, where she earned her bachelor's degree in biological science, graduating cum laude with a minor in chemistry. That's impressive on its own, but for anyone who knew Becky, it wasn't surprising. She was brilliant. Yes, but she was also driven by purpose. It was during her college years that Becky crossed paths with the man who would one day become her husband, Tim Bliefnick. Tim was a football player at Quincy University, and at first, they were just friends. But about 2 years after graduation, that friendship turned into something more. They began dating, eventually moving in together, and not long after, they married. Life seemed good. They started a family together, welcoming their first son. Becky had been working as a successful pharmaceutical sales representative. But after their child was born, she and Tim agreed she would stay home while he continued working. For a while, about 5 years, things appeared happy. They had 2 sons by then, and from the outside looking in, their life seemed stable. But appearances, as you and I both know, can be deceiving. Becky had always dreamed of working more directly in the medical field. Pharmaceutical sales had given her stability, but her heart was in helping people, hands-on. She wanted to become a nurse. When she told her friends and family about her decision to go back to school, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Everyone knew she had the heart, the brains, and the compassion to be an extraordinary nurse. Everyone, that is, except Tim. Tim wasn't supportive of her decision. And according to Becky, this was the point when their marriage began to change. She described him becoming more controlling, more manipulative, but Becky pressed forward. Nursing school was challenging, but she thrived. Even when she became pregnant with her 3rd son, she missed only 1 day of school. 1. That's the kind of determination she had. When the pandemic hit, Becky worked as a traveling nurse. That same year, she was honored with the Daisy Award, a national recognition for nurses who demonstrate extraordinary compassion and skill. For Becky, it wasn't about the award. It was about her patience. She was the kind of person who would drop off a crib for a friend in need, help assemble it, bring food to a sick neighbor, or spend extra time with a frightened patient. She wasn't just a nurse. She was a healer. Her specialties included trauma nursing and sexual assault examination. She volunteered at local schools and even worked with animal rescue groups. She poured herself into service, at work, at home, and in her community. Her friends described her as the quintessential boy mom. She was just as happy cheering from the sidelines of a sports game as she was wading through mud on a frog hunting adventure with her sons. But behind the scenes, things with Tim were unraveling. Becky's sister, Sarah, said Tim refused to help with the boys, while Becky juggled nursing school and clinicals. He even admitted that he didn't support her decision to go back to school, claiming it was out of concern for her well-being. By January 2021, after 11 years of marriage, Tim filed for divorce. And what followed was a bitter, drawn-out battle over money, the house, and custody of their 3 boys. During those months, Becky began confiding in friends about Tim's behavior. She described him shoving her, screaming in her face, throwing things, and becoming increasingly unpredictable. In one text to her sister, Becky wrote, "If something ever happens to me, please make sure the number 1 person of interest is Tim. I am fearful he will harm me, come after me, or try to take me away from the kids, or the kids away from me." She sent that message not long after a coworker of hers was murdered by a partner. It was her way of putting her fear in writing, just in case. By September of 2021, the tension between Becky and Tim had escalated into the legal system. Tim filed for an order of protection against Becky, claiming she was harassing and stalking him. His evidence was a recording from a parent-teacher conference where they argued, something that, frankly, happens often during contentious divorces. The judge denied his request. Soon after, Becky filed her own order of protection against Tim, accusing him of entering her home without permission and using their children as a way to gain access. The judge denied hers too. Vicki Smith, the CEO of the Illinois Coalition Against Domestic Violence, later criticized this decision. She pointed out that the allegations of Tim entering Becky's home should have been a red flag. Instead, the court dismissed it as gamesmanship in a messy divorce. One detail from those proceedings stands out. The judge ordered Tim to return a 9mm handgun that Becky had given him during their marriage. Tim claimed he didn't know where it was. That gun was never returned. For nearly a year and a half, the fighting continued. Money, property, custody. By early 2023, there was finally an end in sight. The divorce trial was set for early March. This should have been the beginning of a new chapter for Becky, but she never made it to that courtroom. On February 23, 2023, Becky was murdered in her home. That day, Becky's father received a text from Tim, saying he couldn't reach her. Concerned, her father went to check. He found Becky in her bathroom, shot 14 times. The amount of blood, the brutality. No parent should ever have to see that. He called 911 immediately. Police arrived and discovered that the killer had pried open a second-floor window, likely using a crowbar, climbing up from the patio. There was no sign of theft. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. This was targeted. The medical examiner determined Becky was alive for every one of those 14 shots. She suffered for minutes before she died. Her bedroom door had been kicked in, and investigators believe she tried to call 911, managing to dial 911 before the phone was knocked from her hands. 14 shots. That's not random violence. That's personal. That's hatred. At the scene, investigators found a partial shoe print, 8 spent shell casings from a 9mm handgun, and small fragments of plastic scattered around her body. None of Becky's neighbors reported hearing gunshots, but one neighbor had a security camera facing their driveway, which ran alongside Becky's. The footage didn't capture the murder itself, but it did reveal something chilling. On the night before Becky's death, at 1:05 a.m., a person walked down her driveway toward the back of her house. 48 minutes later, that same person walked back the way they came. It had happened before, on Valentine's Day, just over a week earlier. The neighbor saw the alert in real time and texted Becky, who replied the next morning, saying she had heard voices in her yard but saw nothing. Police expanded their search for surveillance footage. 2 other cameras caught an individual riding a bike toward Becky's house around the same time as the sightings on her driveway. The bike had no wheel reflectors, a small but important detail. Becky's sister, Sarah, didn't hesitate to tell investigators who she thought was responsible: Tim. The timing was hard to ignore. Their divorce trial was just days away. Tim lived only a mile from Becky's house. Statistically, in cases like this, the spouse, or soon-to-be ex-spouse, is often the perpetrator. Tim's alibi? He said he was home with their sleeping sons that night. They couldn't confirm it because the boys were asleep the entire time. Remember that missing 9mm handgun Becky had once given him? Becky had been killed with a 9mm. When police searched Kim's home, they found a box of shell casings in the basement. Testing revealed that 27 of those casings matched the 8 found at Becky's crime scene, fired from the same gun. And the bike? Before searching his home, police had already found a bike without wheel reflectors, abandoned less than half a block from his house. Bit by bit, the case was coming together. On March 13th, 2023, just 2 weeks after Becky's murder, Tim Bliefnick was arrested and charged with her killing. He was held without bond. When the story broke, the internet quickly resurfaced a strange clip from 2019, when Tim had appeared as a contestant on the game show Family Feud. Host Steve Harvey asked, "What's the biggest mistake you made at your wedding?" Tim's answer, saying, "I do." At the time, it was just another edgy joke for the cameras, but in light of what happened later, it became an eerie piece of dark foreshadowing.
What's the biggest mistake you made at your wedding?
Honey, I love you, but said I do. Not my mistake. Not my mistake. I love my wife.
That brings us to the trial and the mountain of small but damning pieces of evidence that would eventually seal Tim's fate. Tim's trial began on May 23, 2023, exactly 3 months after Becky's death. The prosecution's approach was clear. It wasn't about one single piece of evidence, but the overwhelming combination of them all. Plastic fragments. Remember those tiny plastic pieces found scattered near Becky's body? Investigators traced them back to reusable Aldi shopping bags, the exact same type stacked inside Tim's home. Prosecutors suggested Tim had fired the gun through one or more of those bags, either to catch the shell casings or to muffle the gunshots. That's how fragments ended up at the scene. A DNA expert testified that Tim was more likely than not a contributor to the DNA found on those pieces of plastic. The defense tried to downplay this, saying both Becky and Tim used those bags regularly to carry their kids' belongings back and forth. His DNA being on them, they argued, meant nothing. During the autopsy, DNA under Becky's fingernails matched Tim. Again, The defense countered. The children could have transferred that DNA from Tim to Becky in everyday contact. Investigators also found a crowbar in Tim's basement. The pry marks on Becky's second-floor window were consistent, microscopically, with that crowbar. It wasn't absolute proof, but it was another link. Then came the most jaw-dropping piece for the jury. Tim's phone search history. Among his searches, how to open a door with a crowbar, how to clean gunpowder off your hands, how to make a homemade pistol silencer, how to open a window from outside. Average Quincy police response time. Can you identify if a shell was fired from a specific gun? The defense argued there were no timestamps for most of these searches. They could have been done after the murder. But to the jury, the sheer content of them was damning. On February 14th, 9 days before Becky's murder, security footage showed a person walking toward the back of her house. Shortly after, Tim made over 200 online searches for a specific license plate and VIN number. That plate belonged to the truck of a man Becky had been dating. Prosecutors argued that Tim saw the truck and became obsessed, searching the information for hours that night. Tim claimed he was fine with Becky dating and only looked it up then because it was the only quiet time while the kids slept. But 200 searches? That's obsession, not curiosity. This was one of the prosecution's strongest points. 54 shell casings were found in Tim's basement. 27 of them were a match to the 8 at Becky's crime scene, fired from the same gun. That gun? A 9mm Becky had once given Tim, which the court had ordered him to return. He never did. The defense tried to call this human error. But 27 exact matches isn't an accident. It's a pattern. It had no reflectors on the wheels, just like the one in surveillance footage heading toward Becky's home at night. It was found abandoned half a block from Tim's house. Investigators discovered Tim had a secret Facebook account under the name John Smith. Through that account, he'd been searching for a bike exactly like the one that was later found. The prosecution argued that Tim's motive wasn't just the looming divorce and custody battle. They claimed Becky was gathering witnesses to testify about accusations against Tim's father, Ray, involving inappropriate behavior toward minors. Becky had tried to get an order of protection to limit Ray's time with the children, unsuccessfully, but had still managed to ensure he couldn't see them without another adult present. Prosecutors believed Tim wanted to silence her before this came up in court. And then there were Becky's own words, the texts to her sister, the warnings to friends, the fear that if anything happened to her, it would be Tim. The defense infamously brushed these off as girl talk. For many, especially women in the courtroom, that dismissal was infuriating. After 6 days of testimony, the jury deliberated. They returned with a verdict. Guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Guilty on 1 count of home invasion. For Becky's family, it was justice, but not closure. Her 3 boys, ages 12, 10, and 5, had lost their mother to violence and their father to prison. Sentencing. On August 11th, 2023, Tim was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The judge's words were chilling. You researched this murder. You planned this murder. You practiced this murder. You broke into her house and you shot her. 14 times. Some while she lay on the ground. You did this while your children were upstairs in their beds. At the sentencing hearing, Becky's loved ones spoke directly to Tim and to the court through powerful victim impact statements. Her mother, Bernadette, addressed him with raw pain in her voice. When you murdered Becky, you took from your boys the person who loved them most on this earth. You replaced their mother's love with emotional scars and trauma that will last their lifetimes. Your soul is black with hate. Your heart has only love for itself. You should never be allowed to be free again.
When you murdered Becky, you took from your boys the person who loved them the most on this earth. You replaced their mother's love with emotional scars and trauma that will last their lifetimes. Becky's family, friends, co-workers, and patients will never again see her smile, hear her laugh, feel her embrace, or receive her love. We are left with emptiness that cannot be filled. We are only left with memories. Your soul is black with hate. Your heart has only love for itself. You should never be allowed to be free again.
Her sister, Sarah, stood before the court, her voice trembling with grief, but strong with conviction. Becky's death was gruesome, painful, and senseless. You wanted her to suffer, and if that was your goal, you succeeded. Imagining her fear, imagining her begging for her life, begging for her children. It's unbearable. We ask that you be sentenced to the fullest extent of the law, life in prison without parole.
I'm Becky's only sister. Becky's death was gruesome, painful, and senseless. You wanted her to suffer. You probably wanted all who loved her to suffer. And if that is the case, you succeeded. Losing Becky in any other way, infection, cancer, or a car accident, would have been tragic, heartbreaking, and agonizing. But this, imagining her fear, imagining her begging for her life, begging for her children, imagining her there, lying on the floor of her bathroom, paralyzed, struggling to breathe, and bleeding from 14 bullet wounds, praying to God in her last moments of consciousness to keep Deacon, Grayson, and Arlen safe from you. It's all unbearable. That Tim be sentenced to the furthest extent of the law, life in prison without parole. Our lives will be forever lived with an emptiness that can never be filled due to his premeditated and gruesome crime against humanity. Knowing he will face a lifetime of isolation and emptiness behind bars is only a small solace as we try to make sense of this inconceivable world without Becky.
Every person who spoke echoed that same heartbreak, that same fury. The lead prosecutor closed with a statement that left the courtroom heavy with silence. The defense asks for leniency, hope, and mercy. I ask that this court show the defendant the same leniency he showed Becky when he fired 14 bullets into her body. The same hope he showed his wife when he stood over her, firing again and again. The same mercy he showed her as she lay paralyzed on the cold bathroom floor, struggling to breathe. Show him no more than he showed her. None.
Ask for a sentence of leniency, hope, and mercy. Your Honor, I ask this court today show this defendant the same leniency that he showed Becky Bliefnick on February 23rd when he fired 14 bullets into her body. I ask that this court show him the same hope he showed his wife when he stood over her and fired that gun again and again and again. And on August 11, 2023, I ask this court to show him the same mercy he showed Becky Bliefnick when he left her alone on that cold bathroom floor, paralyzed from the waist down, unable to breathe because a bullet had pierced her lung. Show him the same mercy he showed her on February 23rd when he left her to die completely and utterly alone.
For Becky's 3 young sons, the sentence brought no comfort. Their reality is now one of loss on both sides. No mother to hold them, no father to guide them. The home they knew has been replaced by an entirely different world. Becky's friends and family have stepped in, determined to surround them with love and stability. But the scars will remain. The lasting legacy of Becky Bliefnick. In the wake of her death, many have donated to the Daisy Foundation in her name, honoring her commitment to compassionate care. Her story has inspired conversations about domestic violence, about the warning signs that too often go unheeded, and about the urgent need for systems that protect victims before it's too late. This case is not just about a crime. It's about the devastation left behind when that love is violently taken away. If you or someone you know is experiencing abuse or feels unsafe in a relationship, please reach out for help. You are not alone. This has been Hannah, your storyteller, on Whispers of Crime. Until next time, stay safe, take care of one another, and remember, the quietest whispers often tell the loudest truths.